This is Bruce Houghton of Hypebot, Bands in Town, the Skyline Artist Agency, and the Berklee College of Music. And this is the Your Morning Coffee podcast. I listen to Mike Etchart and Jay Gilbert because they are the only two people I know that have had more jobs in the music industry than I do right now. That means these guys know a lot of stuff about a lot of things. So I learn something new every time I listen to the Your Morning Coffee podcast. And you will too.
From Chatmetric, challenges artists face in the modern streaming era.
From the MLC, the Mechanical Licensing Collective brings legal action for unpaid royalties against Spotify USA Inc.
From Billboard, a timeline of the music industry's bundling feud with Spotify.
And from LaMonde News and also Rick Beato, the most popular musician you've never heard of, Johan Röhr has been streamed 15 billion times on Spotify. And yes, I said billion.
Wow.
All of this and maybe even a recap of the recent Music Biz 2024 conference, if we can get Jay to share that info, I should say. So many things to cover today. We're glad you're here. We're going to press the button to start right about now.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand! Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air, on the air, on the air, on the air, on the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
So good to see you, Jay.
Good to see you, my friend.
Back from Nashville. Nashville, and I heard you had a great time.
I did, and I'll tell you all about it. Before I get there, I wanted to just mention something that's such a great resource. In your morning coffee this week, you'll see this. It's called a best calendar from PR firm Surefire. Man, it is such a great resource. It has, holidays, conferences, festivals, basically all of these entertainment industry events. And they do it, I think, a couple times a year. But it's such a fantastic resource. I talked to Marilyn over at Surefire, and she said it's fine for us to share it. So I put it in the newsletter. Make sure you grab that and pull that down. It is a fantastic resource.
Well, and we've been doing the podcast now for a couple of years, and I wasn't familiar with it until we started talking about it. And it is, as you said, it is a fantastic resource and highly recommended to put that in your calendar. It is really, really good. And Jay, of course, Music Biz 2024 was in Nashville last week, and I've been told it's going to be in Atlanta next year.
That's right.
There were panels and presentations on every aspect of the music business, from digital and physical, music startups, managing money, neighboring rights, sync, metadata, artificial intelligence, gaming, mental health, inclusion, touring, plus DSP workshops, and much, much more. Your panel kicked off the conference. What do you say? How was that? Must have been fun.
Oh my gosh. I've done a bunch of these panels over the years, either as a panelist or a moderator. I really enjoy, just speaking with smart people. And anyway, our panel, as we mentioned, the title of the panel was Planning Your Next Release, Advice from the Experts. And the description that they listed in the program was, releasing music is easy. Some would say too easy. But doing it right takes planning. Fortunately, industry veterans walk you through the best practices on creating a successful release launch.
Well, you were the moderator, of course, and panelists you had. Talk about a great group of people. Randall Foster, he's, of course, from Symphonic Distribution. Dustin Boyer from Venture Music. Caitlin Parmenter, you refer to her as KP, and she's over at Alchemy Artist Services. Eric Petty, he's over at M Theory. Rachel Behringer, she's at CD Baby, and your panel was part of the Music Biz Roadshow presented by CD Baby and supported by the MLC. What a groovy group of people.
Oh, wow. We had a great panel. There's a video of it on the Music Biz website if you want to take a look at it in case you couldn't go. But I had these panelists up there, and that's a lot of panelists for a panel. So I wanted to sort of break it down so everybody could have some input. So I asked them 4 questions about planning a release, and here are those questions. One was, when you sit down with the artist, manager, label, distribution, whatever, what are the questions that you typically want to ask? Number 2 was, what are some of the platforms and tools that you're using for developing and middle-class artists today? Number 3, what are some common mistakes that you see artists make typically during a release cycle? And the last one was, with the overwhelming demands placed on artists today, how do you recommend they allocate their time and energy? For example, writing, recording, performing, practicing, that sort of thing versus socials, TikTok, YouTube, content creation.
Huge issue. So let's listen to how the panel answered your first question. When you first sit down with the artist and or manager, what questions do you typically ask?
I'm super honored today. I've been coming to this thing for 25 years, and it's so great to see so many familiar faces. I'm honored to have this panel up here. These are some of my favorite people on the planet, very smart music marketers and just really great people. So we're going to kick this thing off. But before we do, I want to just read off a couple of stats to kind of tee things up. So this is just in the latest Luminate report. There are 184 million ISRCs, basically tracks, that are being tracked by Luminate today. So only about 2.3% of those have had over 1 million plays. Now, if you look at all of your favorite artists on your DSP of choice, you'll probably see that most of them have over 1 million plays, but that's because of the volume today. That's actually fairly rare. So get this, 152 million, so this is like 86%, have been played either 1,000 or less times, right? But here's the one that really jumped out at me. Nearly 46 million, 25%, have had 0 plays. That's a problem. There's this fire hose of music coming out. But this panel here, we're going to help sort of talk you through what are some good best practices. What are some things that you should do to sort of rise above that clutter? And I want to kick it off. We'll do a quick intro, but one of my favorite quotes is by Jonathan Daniel. Jonathan Daniel runs Crush Management, Sia, Miley, Green Day, Panic, Beast. He has this great quote, and I use it at every presentation I do. He says, "If you give me a great song, my job is easy. You give me a good song, my job is impossible." That's the industry today. So as we kick this off, the first thing I want you to remember is everything that we're talking about here starts with the premise of we're starting with great music. We're gonna kick this thing off, and I wanna start with KP over here. So when you start planning a release cycle, right? When you sit down with an artist, a manager, label, distributor, whoever you're talking to, what are some of those first things that you talk about?
Man, narrative is everything. Like you said, if you give a great song, the job is easy. And I think that, paired with a great song, like having a strong message down to what's the music about, what's your story, what's your differentiating factor. With the amount of music that comes out, it's not enough just to say, I have a song coming out this day, right? I feel like getting an artist to sit down and think about the why they're putting that music out, and then all of the different content angles, kind of content buckets, and even content that they're going to plan to make, right? I think a lot of artists think about, the music that they're putting out and what dates they're going to put it out, but they don't take a step further and think through what video content am I going to have, right? What's the story that I'm going to tell. How am I going to tell that story on each platform? So I always start there.
I think that is so smart. I mean, we're storytellers, we're story listeners. That narrative is, why should anybody care? And that draws you into the music. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of that, but also too, I mean, I like to talk to an artist and, just really understand, where they are, where they want to go, where they see themselves, benchmarks for success, and just goals, in general. You dig and dissect the team and resources and things of that nature, but, you kind of want to make sure that the goals line up and, the entire team is moving in the same direction.
I think that is so smart. So we got narrative, we have the goals. You have to set those goals. Otherwise, are we underperforming, overperforming? What are we doing? Randall, what do you talk to when you talk to artists, labels, people about a release cycle? What are some of those things that you want to make sure you talk about?
So audience engagement, I think, is the number one goal. I think great music, like you said, great music with no audience is the tree that falls in a forest. Nobody's there to hear it make a sound. So making sure that the audience is there, making sure that they are targeted properly, and that they have enough lead time prior to the release to do the proper marketing is really important. And then for me, I'm looking beyond the release. I know that this is about planning your next release, but I want to talk about planning your next 10 releases, because that cadence needs to be set, and it needs to be set in stone so that you have next steps after the first track drops.
Yeah, well put. Dustin, I think one of your superpowers is engaging an audience and growing an audience. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and building on what KP said, I think that what a lot of artists miss is, how does that narrative lead into what your audience is, essentially. I think that the why then has to create a value, and I think a lot of artists struggle to not just find like the vague value, like this is a song about a breakup, you're going through a breakup, but like more specifically, what does your audience look like? What is the archetype that you're building? And I always like to use the example, if your song is about treating somebody better than you treat yourself, then what do people's lives look like? Is that a significant other? Is that your parents? If you start to build that, then those hooks and those narratives become easier.
Yeah. What would you say?
Great question. Well, I think for me, I'm coming from the artist perspective. I don't do a ton of artist development as part of my job. So I'm kind of coming from a different angle as the artist themselves. But from what I've learned through marketing, through work, it is so important to have a plan for before, during, and after, and like a post-mortem, looking back, how did this do? How did this perform? What can we do differently the next time? And yeah, just making like a very specific social media plan, of course, that given that that's my job, figuring out how many videos are we going to make? What's going to be the, topic of each of those? And like you said, Dustin, how are we going to make that connection with the audience on all the different platforms? What's the story we're going to tell in those different places? And literally planning it out to a T is how I like to do it.
I'm really bummed I didn't make it, Jay. What a great group of people. And again, fascinating things we've talked about time and time again. And it's interesting to hear everyone's take on that. And yeah, good on you. That was a fun day, I bet.
It was a great day. And I think the crowd there, it was standing room only, I think they went away with some really good practical information, because we like to say that the music industry has changed while we've been having this conversation. These tools and techniques and things that we're doing, they sort of work until they don't, and you're constantly trying new things. And when we ask the question, what are the first things you talk about when you sit down with the artist or manager? We talk about things like goals and what is that narrative, for that release, and things like who is the audience you're trying to reach, and then you can get into things like what is the release cadence and the brand, and of course you need to talk about budgets and things like that. But it was a fantastic panel, probably the best conversation of a panel that I've been participating with. And, thanks to our great panelists, and I can't wait to do it again in Atlanta next year. There was an announcement this last week that you and I were talking about from the company Beatdapp. And I wanted to touch base on it before we get into the stories. The announcement was around Beatdapp and 7 Digital. They recently announced a strategic partnership, and it was aimed at integrating Beatdapp's state-of-the-art fraud detection technologies. We've had their CEOs on, their co-CEOs on the podcast to talk about that. But it's that fraud detection, and then also with 7 Digital's music ecosystem. 7 Digital's platform enables companies to connect their apps with licensed music from any label or publisher using a fully integrated suite of APIs that matches any user management, music format, or business model.
Shockingly, research shows that up to 10% of all streams are fraud across global platforms. When considering that every point of market share is worth about $200 million, even a conservative 5% fraud rate makes the industry's billion-dollar problem apparent and the more vital to combat.
Yeah, so I had a really great conversation with co-CEO Andrew Batey. I sat down with him and talked about, what Beatdapp is doing and sort of some of these new announcements they've been making. Let's listen in. Andrew, so good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Assume that the listener has no prior knowledge about Beatdapp. What is the company's mission?
Yeah, our mission is to stop fraud in the music industry, and specifically streaming manipulation. So there's a massive amount of fraudsters in the industry that are not part of music. 80% of the fraud that we catch is financially motivated. So if you think about it like the scammers that are calling you to try and steal your credit cards or get your grandparents to download an app on their phone because they don't know any better, pretending to be the bank. These are the same infrastructure, industrial scale fraudsters that are now just targeting the music industry because there's a large pool of money that's largely unprotected.
How big of a problem is it in the music industry today, streaming fraud?
At least $2 billion a year gets stolen from artists and is increasing as the pool goes. Those numbers could be much higher. I think as we look back at previous years for DSPs, we'll look and analyze 15, 16 previous years, historically. The fraud's been there, we just never noticed it. And so now that we're going back and looking, it's something that's just existed sort of under the surface for a long time, and no one was really paying attention as they were stealing pennies because no one recognizes pennies, but the pennies add up.
Yeah. You recently announced a partnership. Is it IFRA Law? Is that correct?
Yeah, IFRA Law. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Tell us about that partnership.
Super interesting, actually. So James, who goes by Jim, is a close friend of a friend. And when we were starting to see a bunch of fraud, the question we had internally is, what do we do about this next? Like, how are we supposed to package this? Who do we go to? Do we go to the CIA? Do we go to the FBI? Do our partners want to provide this information to law enforcement to enforce change? And so a friend of ours was like, hey, you should meet James. He was the former chief of organized crime at the Department of Justice. So he is as high as you go in terms of, prosecuting the bad guys. And so we made a connection really early on. We became really good friends. We started sharing with him the things we were seeing casually and saying, hey, we're seeing, for example, a bunch of streams in one location, but it's benefiting owners in a bunch of other countries identically. So imagine every month, 12% of the value goes to Hong Kong, and 10% goes to Canada, and 40% goes to Doha. And you're like, how is this working? And, the summary here was that in that specific instance, it kind of looked like money laundering. And so in order to enforce in all these different regions, streaming's global. It's not like everyone thinks they're just doing it in Jakarta or they're just doing it in India. But in fact, they target the highest per stream payout regions, things like France, Switzerland, Germany, US, UK, and they're VPNing from all these different locations. And so it becomes really hard to figure out, where the fraud's actually occurring from. And then, so you need to track it back to who's benefiting from that fraud. And when you track it back, you find all of these entities spread across the world. And there's just no way for a streaming service or a distribution company to be able to fight that on their own. So what we've started doing is we partnered with Jim and IFRA Law to package all of these cases together, take it directly with a pipeline to Maine Justice, Department of Justice, to organized crime, and be able to help them start enforcing, the law enforcement side of once you catch fraud, and you demonetize it, how do you stop them from doing it again and go after them in all these other countries?
Fantastic. Keep up the great work, and let's talk again.
Thank you so much.
Another great thing, Jay, Ted Gioia returns to Rick Beato YouTube last week. There was a piece we reported on back in March from LaMonde, which is a French newspaper. The most popular musician you've never heard of, Johan Röhr, has been streamed, check this out, 15 billion times on Spotify. Wow. Swedish daily Dagens Nyheter's investigation shows that a few dozen ambient music composers are streamed billions of times. The LaMonde article was written by Anne-Françoise Hivert, a Swedish correspondent. According to her and Ted, ambient music creator Johan Röhr has racked up over 15 billion streams on Spotify from 2,700 instrumental tracks. He goes under 656 different aliases. He's on 144 official Spotify curated playlists with 62 million playlist followers. My God.
Yeah.
He has figured it out, apparently.
And when you watch the video, which I highly encourage you to do, they talk about, well, it's really interesting that all these Swedish ambient instrumental music makers, they just happen to be in Sweden where Spotify is. It's super interesting. When Rick Beato kicks this video off, he says, in this episode, I'm joined by author, historian, and futurist Ted Gioia for another far-reaching conversation that ranges from AI's effects on culture and his thoughts on coffee, which perked my attention.
No pun intended.
And you and I are huge fans of Rick Beato. I've watched so many of his videos. Anyway, he says that Röhr is not only an artist using this strategy, he's not the only one. According to Dagens Nyheter that you just mentioned, 91 Swedish people are hiding behind 5,700 made-up artist names listed as the composers of more than 13,000 tracks on Spotify. But here's a short clip of Ted Gioia telling Rick Beato about this problem and Johan Röhr.
Places like Spotify still have games they can play. Let me give you a very amazing example, I think. The story of Johan Röhr from Sweden. A very interesting individual, Johan Röhr, because he has achieved 15 billion streams on Spotify. Now, that's a large number. Let me tell you how large it is. That's more than Michael Jackson.
Right.
That is more than Elton John. It's more than ABBA. It's nobody out there, with maybe 2 or 3 exceptions in the whole world, can get the kind of streams Johan Röhr is. Nobody knows his name. Now, why is that? Well, Johan Röhr never uses his own name in his music. He has 656 different aliases. Sometimes there's a man or a woman or different national groups or whatever. He never uses his own name. He uses 656 different names and then shows up on all these playlists. He is on 144 different official Spotify curated playlists, reaching 62 million people. Sometimes he's 40% or more of a single playlist, but no one knows about it because the name changes. So they're able to push all this traffic to Johan Röhr. Now, why is Spotify doing this? Now, I got an email from somebody, and I can't say if this is true. They said, Ted, you didn't hear this from me, but Spotify owns all the rights to those songs, and they're using this.
Big surprise. He's Swedish. Spotify's from Sweden.
I know. He lives right down the street from the Spotify headquarters. Right. Now, I can't prove that they are using Johan Röhr to avoid paying royalties to real musicians. But what other explanation can they be? And let me give you a sort of a hint of the disparity here. I started looking at his music, and the music is all just, banal background music, nothing to get excited about. And I found one of his tracks on Spotify that had gotten 4 or 5 million plays.
Okay.
Then I found the same track on YouTube. It had 100 plays.
Right.
Well, wait a second. If this is such a great song,
right, exactly.
If everybody loves this song, why does it only get 100 plays on YouTube? So what I'm worried about is there are these games that are being played. There's no disclosure. Mm-hmm. And this is not good for the music ecosystem again. Right. They're forcing this music on people, and they're only able to do it because the listening experience has become so passive.
Man, that is fascinating. So you can find Ted Gioia on Substack. He's the Honest Broker. And Rick Beato, of course, has over 4 million YouTube subscribers and growing. And he's over there at youtube.com/@RickBeato.
Yeah, huge fan.
And again, as you said, we are both huge fans. And that takes up a lot of my YouTube time right there, looking at Rick Beato's videos. Great stuff.
I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was telling me that his teenage kids, they watch YouTube, not really regular television, and I was like, yeah, I do too. I watch a lot watch a lot of YouTube. Anyway, I attended this Apple meeting or Apple Music workshop at the Music Biz Conference last week, and it was really well done. The presenters were Bryce McLaughlin. He's, head of partnerships, programs, and insights over at Apple, and Steve Savoca, who does music business partnerships. Bryce drilled down into things like music analytics API. And that was mind-blowing if you're into that stuff, and I am. The Apple Music Partnership Program and best practices for combating streaming fraud. By the way, Apple estimates that less than 1% of streams on their platform are being manipulated. They immediately notify labels when their data shows that, there's likely some fraudulent streams there. One label they talked about, they reached out to because they had 98% fraudulent streams, but with quick action, they quickly solved that problem. So that was a great presentation. When you watch like Tim Cook, when he does his presentations, the ones they show online, Bryce was like that. He had that cadence down. And I reached out to a friend of mine at Apple afterwards and I said, man, I'm going to start calling him the bus driver because he just took us to school.
They also talked about the new 100 Best Albums list. Apple Music celebrates the greatest records ever made with the launch of the inaugural 100 Best Albums list. Apple Music released the third installment of that all-time list on Wednesday. The list was chosen by Apple Music's team of experts, a group of artists, including Pharrell Williams and Maren Morris, songwriters, producers, and industry professionals, according to the company. The tech giants said that the list is an editorial statement and that the list is a love letter to the records that have shaped the world we live and listen in a Monday press release.
That's the key thing there. It's an editorial statement. Apple said that it did not factor in streaming stats when compiling this list. This is, an opinion of some very smart people. So Apple Music, they'll release the new album rankings every day for the next 7 days. Albums 70 to 61 they're set to be released Thursday around noon. The top 10 will be revealed May 22nd in a roundtable discussion between Nile Rodgers, Maggie Roger, as well as Apple Music's Lowe and Ebro Darden. Apple has a website to help fans keep track of the countdown.
So explore Apple Music's 100 best albums on Apple Music or visit 100, just the number 100 best.music.apple.com. I'm sure that will good. You and I got to see Nile Rodgers speak at the
Grammy Museum.
At the Grammy Museum, and he is really a dynamic speaker.
Oh my gosh.
He's got great stories.
He's funny, he's smart, and he's very passionate about music. I'm a huge Nile Rodgers fan.
Yes, indeed. So, Jay, let's thank our sponsors because we are so blessed to have a bunch of great people that help us put the show on every week, including our good friends over at Bandzoogle. For over 20 years, Bandzoogle has made it easy to build a stunning website and online store for your music. Now they've added a brand new EPK plan so that musicians can create a professional single-page electronic press kit in minutes. All the features you need to design an EPK are already built in, including fully customizable templates, preset EPK page layouts, music players, images, text bio and video embeds, a gig calendar and press quotes, and access to Bandzoogle's award-winning support team 7 days a week. The new EPK plan starts at just $6.95 a month, and your Morning Coffee podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it free for 30 days. Then use the promo code MorningCoffeeEPK, that's all one word, word, to get 10% off the first year of the new EPK plan subscription. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code morningcoffee EPK.
Yeah, and we'd also like to thank Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music industry and the trends and technologies that are changing how music is discovered, consumed, marketed, and monetized. Edited daily by founder Bruce Houghton with help from Alana Bonilla, Hypebot and sister blog Music Think Tank are published by live music discovery and marketing platform Bands in Town.
You betcha. Bands in Town. Over 80 million live music fans trust Bands in Town to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. It's the #1 artist service platform connecting over 590,000 artists with their superfans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard to manage and promote their tour dates across all platforms.
Yeah, we'd also like to thank the Music Business Association. If you're not a member, you may want to check out their website and become one. This conference this year was just absolutely off the hook. And that conference really creates the rooms in which important conversations that shape the future of the music industry take place. Representing more than 90% of the music industry at large, the Music Business Association provides a trusted forum where ideas and collaboration can flourish.
We also want to do a special shout out to Billboard Pro. Want to know what everyone in the music business is talking about? Get in the know with Billboard Pro. Billboard is offering Your Morning Coffee readers a special 50% discount off the price of your subscription. Click on the link in the Your Morning Coffee newsletter.
Yes.
And check it out. We rely on Billboard Pro so much. Great resource.
We love them. And thanks to our amazing sponsors, Bandzoogle, Hypebot, Bands in Town, and the Music Business Association. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you.
No, we could not. And of course, speaking of not being able to do it without you, Big Jay Gilbert, I get to hang out with every weekend. He's a music industry consultant. He's the curator of the weekly Your Morning Coffee newsletter. And of course, a former executive with Universal Music, Sony Music, and Warner Music Groups, where we overlapped on one of those three.
Yes, we did. And those were some really fun days. And I get to do this show every single week with my good friend, longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, Mike Etchart, formerly of SST Records, Warner Music, Capital EMI, and Universal Music Group.
A checkered past, to say the least. Jay, let's jump into the stories. The first one is from Chatmetric, Challenges Artists Face in the Modern Streaming Era. This is by Sonia Sheehan, that's how you pronounce it. In the current oversaturated music market, artists face endless challenges in getting their music heard on platforms like Spotify.
That's right. With nearly 80% of artists on Spotify never hitting that 1,000 monthly listeners in 2023, visibility is an increasingly essential topic for many musicians in the music industry today. When a 2023 study asked musicians about the biggest challenges that they currently face in their music, over 2/3 responded that breaking through the noise was one of their 3 most significant challenges, with notable runners-up being joining the dots between social activity and streaming, lack of time to create, and lack of financial resources.
So while the lower barrier to entry resulting from streaming has provided some element of democratization, it also created an oversaturated market in which many artists must juggle their creative aspirations alongside the business side of the equation. These days, booking shows, reaching out to playlist curators, and managing social media accounts are just some of the responsibilities that musicians must consider when aspiring to play music as a full-time career.
Yeah, and Sonia digs into this pay gap between musicians and the music industry. She writes, if you are an artist vying to grow on a major streaming platform, the nature of what this balance entails is apparent when you look at how Spotify defines a professional artist. In 2023, their loud and clear update, Spotify reported the number of, quote, emerging and professional artists, end quote, as just under 225,000 out of a total of 10 million artists on the platform. Evidently, what Spotify is referring to here is professional is not elements of the music itself, such as the quality of production or creative value, but rather the artist's ability to balance creating music that generates streams while also knowing how to market themselves. When it comes to who is getting paid among these artists, the number is even smaller. Only 66,000 artists are making over $10,000 on Spotify in 2023.
Wow. So back in 2017, Citigroup reported that musicians in the U.S. only gained 12% of the $43 billion generated by their music, suggesting that while the industry is indeed profitable, the artists making it possible are being left in the lurch. Even celebrity musicians are beginning to speak out on the topic, as James Blake did in a post about the lack of pay for artists and its inevitable leech on quality, to the point where we are seeing an increasing amount of AI-generated music.
Yeah, within this category is the dilemma of fake artists. These are ones that have been present on streaming platforms since their inceptions. As early as 2015, music industry analyst Tim Ingham reported deals between Spotify and Swedish musicians to create music under pseudonyms. And you and I just talked about that. Mm-hmm. While Spotify has denied involvement, there are reports of this continuing into recent years, with Spotify financing individual artists to create songs under 20 non-affiliated artist profiles in order to pay just one artist while generating the streaming counts of several.
So take Effin Mecca, who's a virtual rapper signed to Capitol Records in 2019, whose white and Asian creators were accused of cultural appropriation due to using a black avatar and lyrical content perpetuating stereotypes. Paired with a following of 10 million on TikTok, Effin Mecca's songs have been placed on over 3,000 playlists on Spotify, tracked by Chatmetric.
Despite continued ads on a playlist, none of the songs on Effin Mecca's Spotify profile are currently streamable. None of them. Putting Effin Mecca's monthly listenership at 0. This kind of activity on fake artist accounts is not only bizarre, it also stands in stark contrast to the real artist trying to make a living creating music from scratch to be consciously heard and enjoyed.
Right. So let's talk about quality always wins. So where does all this leave living, breathing musicians who are interested in pursuing their craft because they love to do it, but would rather not be sacrificing all their time to promotion in exchange for minimal profits? Chatmetric spoke to curator Michael Rosen, founder of Digital in Berlin, a platform for sophisticated music culture, and creator of Kies Salon, an innovative annual concert series about his take on how emerging artists should tackle finding success in music. His view is an optimistic one. Quality always wins.
Right. He went on to say that I am 99% confident that if you are an emerging artist and you're doing great stuff, you'll be reached by the right people, he said, he worked to help independent artists make better economic use of their creative potential since 2008.
So concerning the artists who approach him to say that they are putting music out there but not getting where they want to be with gigs, shows, and management, he has a simple answer. They could have the best marketing agency in the world. There is a reason why. The music is just not good enough.
Ooh. He also talks about finding the right rhythm. Chatmetric also spoke to Cindy Bouchikar, a.k.a. Cindy BB, a London-based singer-songwriter whose music mixes electronic with North African and Arabic influences. The 10-year journey of her career has been largely self-directed. After arriving in London in 2015, she attended university for vocals and songwriting, and since 2022, she has made music under the independent London label, Sweat Entertainment.
While the label has helped her manage various tasks, including getting her tracks featured on their well-followed playlists, Cindy finds that there is still much to be done on her part to get her music out there, such as reaching fans through social media. With this to do on top of 2 jobs, she is often left overwork. I feel like there are not enough hours in the day, she said. I'm staying positive by being grateful, really, and acknowledging the progress I've made through the years.
Yeah, she noted that she's learned the most by trying things out and seeing what sticks. She said, today artists have to wear all of the hats, and they have to be their own promoters, managers, creative directors, everything. A lot of people are going to give you advice, but you have to try to fail. You have to do that to succeed and see what's best for you.
So when talking about making it work, when it comes to pursuing a career as a musician, there can be seemingly endless number of things to keep in the balance: getting music out there to listeners, creative development, taking advantage of opportunities, making it work financially. And when things seem to not be happening fast enough, a whole lot of patience.
Amen.
Damn straight.
Yeah. And we
yeah,
talk
yeah.
about
It's
this,
tough.
on the panel. And I hope you go and watch that panel if you haven't seen it, because there's an area about this where we talk about it's too much for an artist today to manage all of it. You can't do it all. Write, record, produce, tour, as well as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I mean, it's just TikTok. It's way too much for one artist. And I think that's what she's sort of talking about here. Interesting article.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Really interesting. All right. The last story, Jay, it's from the MLC. The Mechanical Licensing Collective brings legal action for unpaid royalties against Spotify USA Inc. This was from a press release. The complaint asserts Spotify has underpaid the MLC for royalties due under the compulsory mechanical blanket license.
Yeah, this was a big topic. When I was flying back from Nashville, I could hear several conversations on the plane where people were talking about this. So the MLC, the Mechanical Licensing Collective, which we talk about a lot, and we have Chris Arend on, and we're big fans. They announced Thursday that it had filed a legal action against Spotify in the U.S. The action seeks to recover unpaid royalties due under the compulsory mechanical blanket license, and we'll get into this in a second, which obtained by Spotify to reproduce and distribute musical works in the U.S. via their consumer music streaming platform.
So the action states that beginning in March of 2024, Spotify asserted that its premium individual, duo, and family subscription streaming plans were now bundled subscription offerings because those plans included access to audiobooks. Applying the rate formula applicable to bundled subscription offerings results in a reduction of the service provider revenue that Spotify reports, which results in an underpayment of royalties.
Yeah, they estimate it's like $150 million. The MLC believes that Spotify's position doesn't comply with applicable law and regulations. The MLC has statutory authority to address Spotify's non-compliance with its royalty payment obligations, and the MLC is taking legal action to enforce those obligations and ensure that Spotify pays all of the royalties due from its use of songs on premium plans.
Right. So the MLC's CEO, Chris Arend, said the MLC was designated by the Register of Copyrights to administer the blanket license and is the only entity with a statutory mandate to collect and distribute blanket license royalties and take legal action to enforce royalty payment obligations. The MLC takes seriously its legal responsibility to take action on behalf of our members when we believe usage reporting and royalty payments are materially incorrect.
Right. And you may wonder, how did this happen? How did this come together? And Kristen Robinson over at Billboard, she put together a timeline, and it's really well done that really explains how this came about. So she says that in March, Spotify began paying music publishers and songwriters a discounted royalty rate for streams on its premium tiers. And the music business isn't accepting the change without a fight. Spotify says that by adding audio books to its premium offerings, the subscriptions have now been reclassified as bundles. That's a type of plan that qualifies for a discounted rate on U.S. mechanical royalties, given that multiple products are offered under one price tag.
Right. So Billboard estimated that the change will lead songwriters and publishers to earn about $150 million less in royalties for the first year bundling is in effect. In response, a number of music organizations, including the Recording Academy, the Association of Independent Music Publishers, that's AIMP, the Nashville Songwriters Association International, that's the NSAI, and more, have made statements against the change. The NMPA was most vocal in condemning the move, calling it the end of a period of relative peace between the two parties.
That's right. Soon after, the Mechanical Licensing Collective, the MLC, retaliated with this lawsuit, saying that the premium tiers have been improperly characterized as bundles and the Spotify should revert to the previous rate structure. So to catch up on the music industry's latest fight with Spotify, Kristen's created this timeline. And so let's kick it off. She starts off with August 31st, and that's 2022. Phono Records 4 there was a settlement.
Right. So the NMPA, that's the Nashville Songwriters Association International, and Digital Media Association, DEMA, which represents the streaming services, jointly announced a voluntary settlement to set the rates, for phonorecords for the U.S. mechanical royalty rate for 2023 through 2027. It included the highest headline rate in history, a win for the music business, but it also included a concession to streaming services, allowing them to pay a lower rate for bundling services.
Ah, there it is. Then on December 30th, 2022, the judges, there's a 3-panel judge panel that they approved phonorecords for. So Copyright Royalty Board approved phonorecords for settlement in the official U.S. mechanical royalty rate for 2023 through 2027, just a few days before it took effect.
So fast forward to October 3rd of 2023, audiobooks got added to Spotify Premium. So Spotify began to roll out 15 hours of free audiobook listening per month to premium users in the UK, Australia, and later the US.
Yeah, but then in March of this year, March of 2024, Spotify Premium quietly reclassified as premium, audiobook only. That tier launched. March marked the first month that Spotify accounted to pay a discounted bundle rate for premium, duo, and family plans, and the first month of its audiobook-specific tier became available. According to a lawsuit from the MLC, quote, on March 1st, 2024, without advance notice to the MLC, Spotify unilaterally and unlawfully decided to reduce the service provider revenue reported to the MLC for premium by almost 50%.
Right. So on April 3rd of this year, Spotify reported to raise prices. Spotify is reported to be upping the price of premium subscriptions in certain markets later this year. On April 19th of this year, Spotify's bundle reclassification was reported for the first time. Spotify's new reclassification of its premium, duo, and family plans as bundles was reported for the first time, though it was known that this would result in significantly less money in U.S. mechanical royalty for publishers and songwriters. The size of the impact was unreported at this time.
Right, but then April 23rd, Spotify announced this music-only tier. It was in its Q1 earnings call. Spotify announced it would offer a music-only subscription tier, but it didn't state when the offering would be released.
So fast forward to the 9th of May of this year, Billboard calculated that publishers and songwriters will earn an estimated $150 million less in U.S. mechanical royalties than previously expected in the next 12 months due to the reclassification of premium, duo, and family plans as bundles.
Wow. And then May 14th, various music publishing and songwriter organizations, including the Recording Academy, Association of Independent Music Publishers, and more, they issued statements against Spotify's move to pay songwriters and publishers less in U.S. mechanicals.
Now, up to May 15th of this year, the NMPA sent a cease and desist letter to Spotify for allegedly hosting lyrics, music videos, and podcast content that contain their members' copyrighted musical works without proper licenses.
Right. And then finally, last week, as we've been discussing, the MLC sued Spotify. They filed a lawsuit against Spotify alleging that the streamer has improperly classified its premium tiers as bundles. And I hope they reverse that, because that's $150 million less to songwriters and publishers. And as you and I say almost every week, they are the ones that this music business is built on, and they're paid the least.
Yes, they are. Well, and it's, again, you wonder, or I wonder, going back all the way back to 2 years ago, did Spotify kind of note this, the some of the fine print in that original agreement, and did they have this kind of planned all along, or is this something that kind of came to them along the way? Something we'll never know. But
I feel like they're being a little sneaky, because when you're doing something above board, you communicate about it. You don't try to slip it in, and you don't quietly do it. And it may not have been that way, but it sure looks like it.
And it feels like it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is something that we'll be following for certainly the foreseeable future. And on that note, we do want to thank everyone for listening in. If you enjoy the show, please tell one friend. Jay and I would certainly appreciate it. And of course, big thanks to Bandzoogle, Hypebot, Bands in Town, and the Music Business Association. We certainly appreciate their participation every week. And on that note, Jay and I say thanks, and we'll be back next week on the Your Morning Coffee Podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.